I now turn to our last panelist, Sangeeta Verma of the Competition Commission of India. You have heard, Sangeeta, many people talking about the connection between competition, multilateralism, and so on. And I look forward to what you have to tell us about this in an Indian context. Sangeeta, all yours.
Thank you, Chair. And greetings to my fellow panelists and all participants here today. My congratulations to CUTS and CIRC for organizing this biennial conference, the 7th in the series, and encouraging tremendous scholarship in the area of competition and regulation, especially in the context of the challenges faced by the developed. The question that was posed to me earlier when we were discussing this was on dealing with the growing market concentration in the digital space. So I will try and address that. This is an important aspect of a new world order that is now coming up. In the past few years, a few digital ecosystems and players have emerged as gateways to the internet with bottleneck power. This has posed significant challenges to policymakers and regulators across the globe. These digital gatekeepers are acting as a first touch point for a consumer's transaction journey, and it is through their ranking logic of search results and advertisements that an online seller's visibility is determined. But at the same time, such ecosystems are also integrating a wide range of products and services, which can lead to efficiencies, reduced prices, and also enhance consumer experience. Clearly, the effect is ambiguous, and we all acknowledge that. So across the world, a slew of new legislative and regulatory responses are being proposed to build an inclusive and resilient economy, with competition being central. Post-COVID, what will also be very important is to ensure that the steps towards recovery do not irreversibly alter markets. Also, that competition principles can be respected along the way by the gatekeeper firms. This assumes great importance in the Indian context, where the online dependence of consumers is rising exponentially. According to one estimate, India's consumer digital economy, which was pegged at about $85 billion in 2020, is expected to become an $800 billion market by 2030. So the digital economy is expected to constitute 60% of the travel bookings, 40% of non-grocery retail, 30% of education, 25% of food and beverages services, and 6% of pharma and grocery by 2030. Having said that, we know that high concentration in the digital space is endogenous to the market itself. Market power in the digital space is also uniquely durable. We know that network effects may prevent a newcomer with superior technology from replacing an established incumbent. Sticky consumer behavior, when combined with lack of data portability, increases the switching costs of customers and helps maintain the status quo in the market. Due to these features, platform markets may be more concentrated than other industries, as most consumers would flock to larger players, leaving smaller players competitively unviable. Once we recognize this problem, the question at hand is, what are the instrumentalities available to governments and regulators in dealing with it? So the mere fact that one firm has entrenched market power in a particular industry is not condemned. It is the way that market power is used that is subject to competition scrutiny. In these cases involving dynamic competition, at the CCI, we try to strike a balance between short-term, narrow price concerns and the long-term gains that arise from innovation. A nuanced assessment based on the facts of each case and the market and technology in question is the strategy that the Commission has adopted. Another issue with market concentration in the digital ecosystem is, and that has been mentioned earlier by earlier speakers also, is how to account for data-related effects. Data is emerging as a key intangible asset that can drive certain acquisitions in the digital space. Control over data by gatekeeper firms may result in exploitative and exclusionary conduct by firms, which may fall foul of the provisions of the Competition Act. Tying with other digital products is another thing that we have seen, and this further strengthens the data advantage enjoyed by the dominant incumbent. It allows cross-linking the data collected across services, creating a vicious circle from the competition perspective. The competition impact of data privacy compromise has now gained traction in the antitrust framework. Loose privacy policies of dominant firms may lead to exclusionary practices, reinforcing their position and allowing them to leverage themselves in neighboring and even unrelated markets. This would result in entry barriers for new entrants. So the antitrust law framework, at least in India, is broad enough to address the exploitative and exclusionary behavior arising out of privacy standards of entities commanding market power. At the CCI, we are closely scrutinizing such data privacy concerns that have a direct impact on competition. The number of the problem that requires policy and regulatory redressal in these markets is the bargaining power imbalance and information asymmetry between platforms and their business users. Platform neutrality has been at the center stage of antitrust enforcement in digital market cases. This area continues to be on the radar of the Competition Commission of India to ensure that platforms do not indulge in anti-competitive behavior such as self-preferencing, deep discounting, leveraging and imposition of unfair discriminatory conditions on their business users, and so on. This imbalance and the resulting concerns were elaborately discussed in an e-commerce market study that the Commission conducted. The Commission did this under its advocacy mandate, and under that mandate, we have urged the e-commerce platforms to improve transparency over certain areas of their functioning that will help in bridging information asymmetry. Compliance with this measure can positively influence competition, not only on the platform, but also between platforms. Based on the findings of the study, the Commission has recommended self-regulation by the e-commerce marketplace platforms with regard to search ranking criteria, collection, use and sharing of data, user review and rating mechanism, revision in contract terms, and discount policy. Market studies have served to inform enforcement decisions and aid our advocacy efforts. So the Commission has included market studies as an important part of our toolkit. Following this market study, I may share that we have observed certain market corrections by platforms, such as addressing issues related to exclusivity and preferential treatment. The implementation of competition law should aim at improving economic outcomes that can maximize the gains from trade on these digital platforms. This would create a balance that incentivizes innovation of the platform as well as their trading partners. For the tech companies, this would imply imposition of new or strengthened access requirements, non-discrimination provisions, and interoperability. This can be achieved either through actions by the competition agencies or by new digital rules through other instruments. It seems the choice before policymakers is whether we live in an environment with a few highly regulated firms controlling large ecosystems or a more fragmented digital world. The big policy question is which environment will deliver on innovation and hence consumer welfare. Today, I've just spoken about some regulatory measures that we have been taking to deal with these market concentration problems. These are based on current thinking the world over and in India. Since these markets are dynamic, regulatory responses will also have to be dynamic, and some form of experimentation with various instruments is only natural. Going forward, I believe it is our duty as a competition authority to assist with the government's endeavor of digitization by promoting competitive digital markets, both through enforcement and advocacy. And we intend to play a decisive role at building a fairer and sustainable, better world. Once again, I would like to thank CUTS and CIRC for engaging with us and for giving this opportunity. And I look forward to the panel discussions that follow, particularly the discussion that immediately follows this session, which I hope will provide some useful insights on these issues. Thank you very much.
Very much, Sangeeta. Now, so we've heard all our panelists, and they've been very helpful. I wanted to pose one or two questions later for the panelists to look at. One thing that we've not touched on adequately is the argument that is often heard in some countries that multilateralism has worsened inequalities. Now, that's not an argument that I'll hear in China or more recently in Bangladesh or Vietnam. where you could argue that the opening up of the trade system has actually helped to reduce poverty to a substantial extent, in that sense, reduce inequality. And I wondered whether there is how one responds to this argument about pro-protectionist argument from the perspective of reducing inequality. Is that at all relevant? And Apple would be a good example to look at. I thought I'd just pose this. I didn't hear a clear answer to this from the panelists. A second thing which has come up is, Ratin raised, is how will this, what we call multilateralism, the practical practice of multilateralism today, work with the ideation of a nation, and he gave us several examples. And I was actually going to ask whether Arantxa could respond to that, as she has experience from both sides, so to speak, and whether she can respond to the question that Ratin had raised. I have something more to say on the whole issue of the multilateralism and global commons, but I'll leave that for the end. So let me just pose this. There is another question which has been posed, which is, will it be problematic if underdeveloped economies facing hardships during the COVID keep up with multilateralism instead of keeping their country first? In effect, it's, if you like, a subtle argument for protectionism. Questions for Isabel Durant, and given the challenges emanating particularly from the concentration of power in e-commerce, is it necessary for multilateral bodies like WTO to deliver more decisively? And if that is the case, will the national competition authorities have to step in? And can national competition authorities step in unilaterally in organizations which are clearly have operations spread across many, many countries? So these are some of the questions which have come up. So let me turn first to Arantxa and see whether she has a response to the challenge that Ratin has posed.
Thank you very much. And thanks to Ratin for raising this issue, but let me give you my take on this. And this is the whole, is what I call the big paradox. The more you are multilateralist, meaning the less sovereign, the more sovereign you are. And it's a paradox. The more you decide to work multilaterally, the more sovereign you are in protecting your citizens. Because what's protecting the citizens today, what will protect citizens against climate change, what will protect citizens on the pandemic, what will protect citizens against the risks of inflation have a lot to do with a stronger multilateral cooperative frameworks. So the paradox is, the less sovereign you are, the more sovereign you are. So the less you insist on building solutions at the level of the nation state, the more you are going to be protecting your citizens. This is what we've learned in the European Union. And sometimes I can tell you the national reflexes, the Westphalian reflexes of nation states come back, and they come back with a lot of vigor. But the reality is, the more you decide to pool sovereignty, the more you can and the better you can protect your citizens. Now, it doesn't mean that you will cede control. You don't cede control, because you, by definition, is for as long as this is the case in multilateral organizations, it's essentially nations that build the rules. It's nations that adjudicate the rules. But the reality is that they have to do this more and more if they really want to protect their citizens. Now, let me also take the opportunity to address the other question that you put, Nitin, which is multilateralism has worsened inequalities. And let me be very clear on this. I don't think this is true. trade rules make trade possible. They are an enabler. You still need to make this trade happen, and this to a large extent is not in the hands of the agreements or the rules that you build, is on the enabling environment that you create at home and abroad. And you still need to make sure that trade benefits all. It's 3 levels: make trade possible, make trade happen, and make trade benefit all. Now, the make trade benefit all, which is what this discussion of inequalities is about, has a lot to do with what you do beyond trade. What kind of taxation policies do you have? Are they fair? Do they put the burden on citizens as opposed to businesses? What kind of infrastructure investments do you make? What kind of education policies do you have? What kind of access to credits do your businesses have? And the best example that I always use to say that it's not trade rules or multilateral trade rules that fuel inequalities is the European Union. The EU has 27 countries, same trade policy, different levels of inequality, and they have exactly the same trade rules verbatim. They negotiate them as one, they adjudicate them as one, they implement them as one. But the reality is that the domestic environments or many other things are not the same. So if you want a good example of why it's not multilateral trade rules that fuel inequalities, the EU is a good example. Now, this is to me a big call to synergize and to make your trade rules coherent with other areas if you really want these trade rules to be for the benefit of all and not just a happy few. Hence the importance, Nitin, if I may, of ensuring in WTO that the lenses through which we build those rules are multidimensional, that the lenses that we use are for big companies, for small companies, for medium companies, for men traders, for women traders. I know that there was a bit of a resistance at the beginning when we started these conversations because people thought, oh, these are Trojan horses that, you know, they are going to introduce through the back door. But they are, if you want the rules to reflect the diversity of views, this is a good way to do it.
Let me answer the latter part of that, Chair, if you permit.
Yeah, yes, sir.
They've called attention to what we could be doing or are doing. So there's no doubt that digital ecosystems have a global footprint. And the Indian competition law, I just want to share, has provisions for conduct from extraterritorial entities that has an appreciable adverse effect in India. And CCI on its part has not felt constrained. In fact, we have memoranda of understanding with global counterparts to deal with competition issues in general and concentration of power in digital markets for exchange of knowledge and also frameworks. Clearly, market contexts across countries will be different, but we are using this opportunity for cross-fertilization of ideas, and these MOUs are to help us in assessing these markets. So I just wanted to add that